Chapter 1. The Escape. It was the screech of tires that jolted Jack Lawson awake, a deafening honk echoing through the early morning mist. He shot up in bed, heart pounding, his gut twisting with a sense of impending disaster. Something was wrong. Jack scrambled out of bed, yanked on his boots, and sprinted toward the road. The sun had barely begun to rise, but the sight before him sent a bolt of panic straight through his chest. His cattle, his prized herd, were scattered across the highway, weaving between swerving cars. Their massive bodies barely avoided impact as drivers slammed on their brakes. A truck skidded sideways, tires screaming against the pavement, missing one of his heifers by inches. Adrenaline surged as Jack charged toward the pasture fence, or at least, where the fence used to be. The gate swung wide open, creaking lazily in the wind. Someone had let them out. Jack's head whipped around, scanning the dim landscape. And then he saw it, his security camera, mounted high on the barn. If someone had done this, he was going to find out who. By the time he got the herd back inside the fence, his shirt was drenched in sweat, hands shaking from the close calls he had just witnessed. The sun climbed higher as he stormed back into his house, grabbed his laptop, and pulled up the footage. And there she was, clear as day. A figure in a baggy floral dress and slippers flopped against the dirt as she shuffled up to the fence in the dead of night. Mrs. Grayson, his neighbor. The woman who had spent the last 6 months complaining about his cattle as if they were personally ruining her life. Jack watched as she gave the gate a little push, then a full swing, sending it wide open before turning and waddling back to her porch, looking as pleased as a fox in a henhouse. Jack's blood boiled. This wasn't just some petty neighborly spat. She had put his livestock in danger. More than that, she had put people's lives in danger. If even one of his cows had been hit, it could have caused a fatal accident. Jack shoved his chair back so hard it nearly toppled over and stormed outside. Enough was enough. Chapter 2. The Confrontation. Mrs. Grayson was sitting in a lawn chair on her porch, a glass of lemonade in her hand, looking as if she didn't have a care in the world. As Jack marched across the yard, she glanced up, her mouth curling into a smug little smirk. "Well, if it isn't the cowboy," she said, voice dripping with fake sweetness. "Something wrong?" Jack held up his phone, the paused security footage staring her right in the face. "You want to explain this?" he asked, barely keeping his temper in check. She barely even blinked. "What am I looking at?" "Oh, don't play dumb with me." Jack's voice snapped like a whip. "You opened my gate. Let my cattle out onto the damn highway. Do you have any idea what could have happened?" Mrs. Grayson took a slow sip of her lemonade. "I was just giving them some fresh air. They looked cramped." Jack's voice shot up an octave. "Cramped? They have 100 acres to roam. What the hell is wrong with you?" She shrugged, entirely unfazed. "I don't know, Jack. Maybe you just have too many cows. Ever think about that?" Jack took a step closer, gripping his phone so hard his knuckles turned white. "You could have killed someone," she huffed, setting her glass down on the armrest. "Maybe someone should do something about all these animals before they ruin our nice neighborhood." Jack let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Nice neighborhood? Lady, we live in the countryside. This is ranching land. My family's been raising cattle here for 3 generations. She waved a dismissive hand. "Things change. Some of us are trying to bring a little class to the area." Jack stared at her, genuinely speechless for a moment. "You think releasing livestock onto a highway is classy?" She gave a satisfied little smile. "Well, it certainly stirred things up. That was it." That was the moment Jack decided he wasn't letting this slide. The anger burning in his chest turned cold, calculating. Jack nodded slowly. "All right, Mrs. Grayson. Have it your way." He turned on his heel and walked off, her laughter trailing behind him. Jack didn't stop until he was back in his truck, gripping the steering wheel so hard his fingers ached. She thought this was a game. She thought she could get away with it. She was wrong. Chapter 3. The Plan. Jack didn't waste any time. If Mrs. Grayson wanted to play dirty, then he was ready to fight back, but he was going to do it the right way. The first thing he did was call up his lawyer, Mark Reynolds, a no-nonsense, straight-to-the-point kind of guy who had helped Jack's family with land disputes in the past. "She did what?" Mark asked, his voice laced with disbelief. "You heard me," Jack said, pacing back and forth in his kitchen. "She let my cattle out on purpose. I have it all on camera." Mark exhaled slowly. That's criminal negligence, Jack. Maybe even reckless endangerment. If someone had hit one of those cows. I know, Jack interrupted. That's why I need to stop this before she tries something worse. Mark paused for a moment, then asked, has she done anything else? Harassed you in any way? Jack let out a dry laugh. For months. Fines for excessive noise, which is just my cattle existing. Complaints to the county about my fencing. She even tried to report my barn as an unapproved structure. Mark sighed. Sounds like she's trying to push you off your own land. Jack's grip on his phone tightened. She's gonna regret that. Chapter 4, The Counterattack. Jack spent the next 2 days gathering every bit of evidence he had on Mrs. Grayson. Security footage, emails, and even recordings of her harassing him in town. Then, he did something he knew would drive her insane. He went to the county zoning office and filed a formal complaint against her property. See, Mrs. Grayson wasn't exactly a saint herself. Jack had done some digging, and it turned out her own property wasn't up to code. Her fence extended into county land. Her pristine garden? It was actually violating local irrigation regulations. And that fancy guest house she always bragged about? Completely unpermitted. By the time the county inspector arrived, Mrs. Grayson was furious. Jack watched from his porch as she argued with the inspector, waving her hands dramatically. Greg, Jack's neighbor, walked up beside him, smirking. What's going on over there? Jack sipped his coffee. Oh, just a routine property inspection. Greg chuckled. You play dirty, Lawson. Jack smirked. I play fair. Just like she wanted. Chapter 5, The Showdown. It didn't take long for word to spread that Mrs. Grayson was in trouble. She was slapped with multiple fines and ordered to bring her property into compliance. The county gave her 30 days to fix the violations or risk serious legal consequences. That should have been the end of it. But Mrs. Grayson? She wasn't one to go down quietly. A week later, Jack woke up to something far worse than loose cattle. His water supply had been cut off. Jack stormed out to the main line and found a brand new padlock on the valve. And taped to it, a note, written in red ink. Maybe now you'll learn to keep quiet. Jack's jaw clenched as he read the message. This wasn't just a petty feud anymore. This was war. Chapter 6, Retaliation. Jack stared at the padlock, his pulse pounding in his ears. Cutting off someone's water wasn't just harassment. It was illegal. He pulled out his phone and snapped a few pictures, making sure to get the note in the frame. Then, without a second thought, he called Sheriff Tom Williams. Sheriff, I've got a problem, Jack said, keeping his voice steady. My water line's been tampered with, and I think we both know who did it. There was a long pause on the other end. I'll be out there in 20. Jack hung up and exhaled sharply. He wouldn't put it past Mrs. Grayson to try and play the victim when the law got involved. He needed proof, not just his suspicions. So, he did what any smart man would do. He checked his security cameras. Chapter 7, Caught in the Act. It didn't take long to find what he was looking for. At 2:17 a.m., the grainy footage showed Mrs. Grayson sneaking onto his property, a pair of bolt cutters in hand. The footage wasn't crystal clear, but it was damning enough. She had no business being near his water supply, let alone locking it up. By the time the sheriff arrived, Jack was standing by the main valve, arms crossed, laptop open and ready. Sheriff Williams stepped out of his cruiser, looking unimpressed. Let me guess, Grayson? Jack nodded and hit play. The sheriff leaned in, watching the footage with a sigh. That's enough for a warrant. You want to press charges? Jack hesitated for half a second before responding. Hell yes. The sheriff nodded and radioed in. We'll handle it. But you should be careful. People like her, they get desperate when they start losing. Jack glanced toward Mrs. Grayson's house. The curtains twitched. She was watching. Good. She'd pushed too far this time. Chapter 8, The Arrest. The next morning, the entire town was buzzing. Mrs. Grayson was arrested. Jack stood on his porch, watching as 2 deputies escorted her out of her house, her face twisted in shock and rage. This is harassment, she screeched, struggling against their grip. He's lying. That video is fake. The sheriff, standing by his cruiser, sighed. Ma'am, you can explain that to the judge. Jack smirked. Yes, she's not above the law after all. Greg strolled up, coffee in hand, grinning ear to ear. Damn, Lawson. Didn't think you'd actually get her locked up. Jack shrugged. She brought this on herself. Greg chuckled. So what now? You think she'll stay gone? Jack exhaled, watching as the patrol car pulled away. I don't know, but I do know one thing. Greg raised an eyebrow. What's that? Jack smirked. This ranch ain't going anywhere. For the first time in months, he felt peace.